My name is Diana, and I'm 56 years old. And I never imagined my humble garden shed would become the talk of our entire family. I've lived in the same modest house for over 30 years. It's a quiet little place in a suburban neighborhood, surrounded by maple trees and a small yard that I've cared for since my husband, Charles, passed away 5 years ago. Gardening became my therapy after losing him. It was the one thing that made me feel connected to life again. The smell of soil, the bloom of marigolds, the way the sun hit the dew on the leaves every morning, it all reminded me that life goes on, even when your heart feels shattered. My daughter, Melissa, visits often with her husband, Aaron, and their 2 little boys. Melissa has always been kind and soft-spoken, but Aaron, well, Aaron is another story entirely. He's one of those people who always thinks he's the smartest in the room, loud, smug, and always trying to one-up everyone. Ever since he married my daughter, he's treated me like I'm some clueless old woman who should just sit quietly and bake cookies. A few months ago, I had finally finished repainting and redecorating my garden shed. It wasn't anything grand, just a little structure at the back of my yard that Charles built years ago. I'd given it a fresh coat of white paint, added flower boxes under the windows, and hung small solar lights along the roofline. I was proud of it. It was more than a shed to me, it was a piece of my husband's memory, a space that kept me grounded. That weekend, Melissa and Aaron came over for lunch. I was eager to show them how beautiful the shed looked now. As we walked into the backyard, Aaron chuckled. "Wow," he said, crossing his arms. "You really went all out, huh? It looks like a dollhouse for garden gnomes." Melissa gave him a little nudge. "Aaron," she whispered, clearly embarrassed. But he just grinned. That condescending smirk that made my stomach twist. "I mean, it's cute," he continued, "but you really spend all your time fixing up this? You could have at least turned it into something useful." I forced a smile, trying not to let it show how much it stung. "It makes me happy," I replied. "That's useful enough." He laughed again, louder this time. Sure. As long as you're having fun with your little shed project." Melissa rolled her eyes and changed the subject, but the damage was done. I kept smiling, but inside, I felt small. It wasn't the first time he'd made me feel that way. He had a way of turning everything I loved into a joke. And every time, Melissa stayed silent, torn between her husband and her mother. Later that night, after they left, I sat by my shed with a cup of tea. The fairy lights glowed softly, and the evening breeze carried the scent of lavender. I traced my fingers along the wooden panels Charles had built years ago. For a long time, I'd let people, especially Aaron, make me feel like my simple joys were silly or insignificant. But that night, something shifted in me. I realized I didn't need to explain the value of something I loved to anyone, especially someone who measured worth by money or appearances. I knew that shed had more potential than he could ever imagine. It wasn't just decoration. It was space, a resource, and I had an idea that could turn his mockery into my quiet revenge. I'd been reading about people renting out extra spaces, garages, basements, even storage closets to local businesses that needed extra room. My shed was clean, insulated, and secure. If I could make a little money from it, maybe I wouldn't have to rely so heavily on my modest pension. I could finally stand on my own 2 feet again, not just emotionally but financially too. That night, I grabbed my notebook and began sketching ideas. I measured the shed, listed what improvements it might need: extra shelves, better locks, perhaps a small dehumidifier to keep stored items dry. I didn't know exactly where this would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. Aaron's laughter had just given me the push I needed. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, not even Melissa. I wanted to do it quietly, for myself, to prove that my life didn't have to be small or pitiful just because I was older or alone. I wasn't useless. I wasn't outdated. I was resourceful. I was still capable of building something meaningful. Over the next few days, I cleaned out the shed completely. I threw away old tools, organized my gardening supplies, and cleared enough space to envision what it could become. The more I worked, the stronger I felt. Every nail, every brushstroke, every shelf I installed was a step toward independence. By the time I was done, my once simple garden shed looked professional, almost like a small storage unit. I even bought a little digital lock for the door. It felt empowering, like I was taking back control of something I'd lost long ago. I stood there one evening, staring proudly at my handiwork, and I couldn't help but smile. Aaron's laughter still echoed in my mind, but now, it fueled me rather than hurt me. Little did Aaron know, the shed he mocked was my biggest secret and it was already making me money. After that day, I decided I would never let anyone belittle my efforts again. Aaron's laughter had done something to me. It woke up a part of myself I'd buried under years of quiet compromise. I was tired of being pitied, tired of being underestimated. I might not have a big job or a fancy car like him, but I had something far more valuable: determination. After Charles passed, my financial situation became tight. The small pension I received barely covered the basics: utilities, groceries, and the occasional doctor visit. Melissa tried to help sometimes, but I never wanted her to feel responsible for me. I'd already spent most of my life taking care of others. I didn't want to spend the rest of it depending on someone's charity. That's when the idea of turning my shed into something profitable started taking shape. I'd been browsing online one evening and stumbled upon a website that allowed people to rent out unused spaces for storage. People were listing everything from garages to basements and even backyard sheds. Some were earning hundreds of dollars a month just by offering a safe, dry place for others to store their belongings. I thought about my own shed. It was small but solid. Charles had built it with his own hands using thick cedar planks, so it was weather-resistant. I'd recently repainted it and fixed the door hinges. Inside, I had enough room to fit at least a dozen medium boxes, maybe more if I added shelves. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning, I created an account on the storage rental platform. They asked for photos of the space, so I took some from different angles, making sure to capture the freshly painted walls and neat layout. I titled the listing "Secure Backyard Storage, Ideal for Seasonal Items." I wasn't expecting much, but within just a few days, I received a message from a woman named Carla, who owned a local flower shop. Carla explained that her small business struggled with storage during the off-season. She needed a clean, dry space to store extra pots, gardening tools, and decorations she used for wedding events. My shed seemed perfect for her needs. She asked if she could come by to take a look. The following weekend, Carla arrived. She was friendly and practical, the kind of woman who looked like she knew how to get things done. She inspected the space thoroughly, checking the locks, the insulation, and the airflow. "This is actually better than what I expected," she said with a smile. "Would you be open to a monthly rental agreement?" I tried not to sound too eager, but inside I was bursting. "Of course," I said calmly. "I can clear out a few more items if needed." We agreed on a rate of $200 per month, cash, with the option to renew every 3 months. She handed me the first payment on the spot. I can't even describe how good that felt, seeing that money in my hand, knowing I'd earned it myself. It wasn't just about the cash, it was about pride. After she left, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the envelope. I felt tears well up in my eyes. For years I'd been told that I was just getting by, that I should slow down, that my best days were behind me. But here I was, turning something as ordinary as a garden shed into a source of income. Within weeks, Carla began using the shed regularly. She'd drop off boxes labeled with her shop's name and sometimes leave a small bouquet for me as thanks. Her kindness reminded me that good people still existed, people who valued hard work and fairness. But what I didn't expect was how quickly word would spread. A month later, Carla's friend, a wedding planner, reached out asking if I had additional space. I didn't, but the idea of expanding started forming in my head. Maybe I could organize the shed better, add vertical shelving to maximize space. That's exactly what I did. I invested part of my earnings into sturdy metal racks and installed a small dehumidifier to keep everything dry. Soon, I was renting out not just to Carla but to another small business owner who needed short-term storage for craft supplies. In less than 3 months, I was making nearly $500 a month, more than enough to cover my bills and have some left over. Of course, I didn't breathe a word of it to Aaron or Melissa. I wanted to keep my little operation private. Part of me feared Aaron would mock it again, or worse, find a way to ruin it. But mostly, I wanted to enjoy the satisfaction of having something that was entirely mine. Every time Aaron came over and made one of his sly comments about my cute little shed, I'd just smile. Inside, I was laughing at how wrong he was. He thought it was a silly hobby, but it was quietly becoming a small business. The irony made every insult easier to bear. I started keeping track of my income in a small notebook, just neat columns of dates, tenants, and payment amounts. Watching those numbers grow filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just financial stability I was gaining, it was dignity. For the first time since Charles died, I didn't feel helpless. I felt purposeful, independent, alive. I could fix what needed fixing, pay my own way, and even save for little luxuries I hadn't been able to afford before, like a new set of garden tools or a nice coat for winter. Melissa noticed the change in me. She commented one day, "Mom, you seem happier lately. Did something good happen?" I smiled and said softly, "Let's just say I found a way to make things work." She nodded, clearly curious but didn't push. And that was fine with me. Some secrets are sweeter when kept to yourself, but I never could have guessed that my success would soon clash head-on with Aaron's pride. When money started rolling in, I realized I'd stumbled into something much bigger. What began as a small side idea to help me stay afloat had turned into something surprisingly sustainable and even growing. Each month, the tenants I'd started with paid right on time, and through word of mouth, more people began reaching out. My little shed was no longer just a shed, it was an opportunity. Carla, my first renter, was the kind of person who loved to talk. She told everyone in her circle about the sweet lady who rents out her shed for business storage. Soon after, her friend Lisa, a wedding planner, contacted me about keeping her event decorations somewhere safe between jobs. Lisa's business often required bulky items, archways, ribbons, table centerpieces that filled her small apartment. I offered her the back corner of the shed for $150 a month, and she was thrilled. That made 2 tenants, 2 steady payments, 2 more reasons for me to wake up every morning feeling proud of myself. I started spending my evenings reorganizing the shed to make it more efficient. I added a few wall hooks, labeled each section clearly, and even bought a motion sensor light so tenants could easily access their items after dusk. The space became tidy, practical, and professional looking. One day, while I was rearranging boxes, another inquiry came in. A craft store owner named June. She needed temporary storage for seasonal merchandise. I didn't have much space left, but I hated turning away an opportunity. So, I told her I'd find a way to make it work. I cleared out the last of Charles's old tools and personal items. It was emotional. I'd held onto them for years, but I knew he'd be proud of me for finally letting go of things that just gathered dust. After all, Charles always said, "Make room for what's next, Di. Don't let yesterday take up all your space." June came by the next day and was impressed by how organized everything looked. She immediately agreed to rent what little space remained. Just like that, all available space was filled. I was fully booked and earning almost $600 every month from that so-called dollhouse. Every time I checked my online listing and saw positive reviews, I felt like a teenager again, excited, capable, alive. People were praising me for being reliable, professional, and trustworthy. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was succeeding. Meanwhile, Aaron continued to tease me every time he visited. "So, how's your little garden project going, Diana?" He'd smirk. "Still playing house out there?" I'd smile politely and reply, "Better than ever, thank you." I never gave him the satisfaction of knowing how much his words amused me now. Melissa seemed puzzled by how calm I was around him. She noticed I didn't react the way I used to. Once, she even said, "You're being awfully zen." It's about Aaron lately. Usually he gets under your skin. I just chuckled. "Maybe I've learned that sometimes it's better to let people underestimate you," I said. Inside, I was laughing for real. The man who thought I was wasting my time on that silly shed had no idea it was paying more of my bills than his so-called financial advice ever did. As the months went by, I became more strategic. I created a small ledger book to track my tenants' payments, expenses, and profits. I also learned about minor tax deductions for small rental operations. I was doing everything legally and transparently. The pride that came with doing things properly was worth every bit of the effort. Carla often stopped by to drop off new boxes, and we'd chat about life. One afternoon, she said something that stayed with me. "You know, Diana, most people your age wouldn't think to do this. You've got a business mind. You should be proud." I smiled and said, "Thank you, Carla. I think I finally found my rhythm again." The truth was, she was right. I had found my rhythm, my sense of purpose. Each time I received a rent payment, I didn't just see money, I saw validation, proof that I could adapt, even after life had taken so much from me. The only person who still treated me like I was foolish was Aaron. And honestly, I let him. His arrogance made my victories even sweeter. When he'd laugh about my little hobby, I'd nod along and sip my tea, knowing full well that my hobby was quietly outperforming some people's side businesses. One weekend, while Melissa and Aaron visited again, I overheard him telling one of his friends, "Diana's been fussing with that shed for months. I swear, she treats it like a museum. She should just rent it out or something, at least make use of it." I nearly laughed out loud right there. If only he knew. I kept my composure and said nothing, letting him continue digging his own hole. I'd learned that true satisfaction doesn't come from proving people wrong immediately. It comes from watching them realize it on their own, piece by piece, until the truth hits them like a hammer. And deep down, I knew that day was coming. For now, I just kept building, improving the shed, keeping my tenants happy, and managing my little business quietly. I felt empowered every single day. I opened that door and saw the fruits of my labor stacked neatly in boxes and shelves. Every sound of laughter, every mocking tone from Aaron no longer stung, it was fuel. Each visit from him only reminded me why I started this journey in the first place. Still, I knew the day of reckoning would eventually come, and I welcomed it. It was during our family barbecue that my shed became the center of attention once again. The sun was warm that afternoon, and the smell of grilled corn and burgers filled my backyard. I'd set up a few folding tables, covered them with bright checkered cloths, and strung fairy lights around the fence. Family gatherings were something I cherished even when Aaron's smug grin was part of the package. It was a Saturday in late summer, and Melissa had invited a few of Aaron's co-workers and friends to join us. I didn't mind. I liked being surrounded by laughter and conversation, even if some of it was shallow. My grandsons ran through the yard with water guns, squealing with delight. I was refilling lemonade when I saw Aaron standing near the grill, waving his spatula like he was hosting a talk show. "Diana," he called out in that booming voice of his, "I still can't believe how much effort you've put into that shed of yours. It's like your little kingdom back there." Everyone chuckled, and I just smiled. "It keeps me busy," I said evenly. "Oh, I'll bet it does," he said, shaking his head with a laugh. "You know, I told Melissa the other day maybe one day I'll buy you a real shed, something fancy, maybe even one with Wi-Fi." The crowd laughed again, and I could feel my daughter's embarrassment. "Aaron, stop," she said quietly, but he brushed her off. "It's just a joke," he said. "Come on, Diana knows I'm kidding. She loves that thing more than her own house." The comments stung a little, not because they were cruel, but because they were condescending. I'd learned to let things like that roll off my back, but part of me wanted to show him how wrong he was. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. So I smiled and replied casually, "Don't worry, Aaron. My shed pays for itself." His laughter stopped. The words hung in the air like smoke. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, trying to sound amused, but I could hear the shift in his tone. "Oh, just that it's useful," I said. "It's not just for show." His eyebrows furrowed. "Useful how?" I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. "It serves a purpose, that's all." Aaron wasn't used to not being in control of a conversation. You could practically see his mind turning, trying to decode my vague response. "So, what kind of purpose?" he pressed. "You storing something expensive in there or what?" Before I could reply, Melissa shot him a glare. "Aaron, drop it. You're making it weird." He forced a laugh. All right, just asking. I mean, come on, how useful can a shed really be?" I didn't answer. I just smiled, poured myself another glass of lemonade, and turned to help the kids with their plates. But I could feel his eyes on me, curiosity eating at him. Throughout the afternoon, he made little comments here and there, subtle probes disguised as jokes. "So Diana, any secrets in that fancy shed of yours? Or, you're not running a spy operation back there, are you?" His friends laughed politely, but I could tell they sensed something under the surface too. I stayed calm and cheerful, focusing on my guests and the food. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that silence can be more powerful than explanation. Aaron was the type of man who needed answers to feel superior. Denying him that was the sweetest revenge. As the sun began to set, everyone gathered around the table for dessert. The fairy lights flickered on, and the air cooled with a gentle breeze. Melissa leaned close to me and whispered, "What was that about earlier?" Why did you say the shed pays for itself? I smiled faintly. Just something I said to get him off my back, I replied. Don't worry about it. She nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. Aaron, meanwhile, sat across the table, quieter than usual. His smirk had faded, replaced by something else, curiosity, maybe even mild irritation. He wasn't used to being the one left out of the loop. After everyone left that night, I stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the shed, glowing faintly under the garden lights. I could almost imagine Charles standing beside me, chuckling softly. You always knew how to keep them guessing, didn't you, Di? I whispered to myself. The shed looked peaceful, innocent even, but behind that quiet exterior, it had become the source of my pride and stability. I'd worked hard to make it what it was, and I wasn't about to let anyone diminish that. As I cleaned up the dishes, I replayed Aaron's expression in my mind, the flicker of confusion, the faint frown, the forced laughter. He didn't like being left in the dark, and now I'd given him a mystery to chew on. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes. Aaron would mention my shed in passing, pretending it was a joke, but there was always an edge in his tone. Still fixing up that little moneymaker of yours, Diana? He'd say with a smirk. I'd simply nod. Always improving, I'd reply. Each time I refused to elaborate, his interest deepened. I could tell it was starting to bother him that he couldn't quite figure me out. For a man like Aaron, not knowing was unbearable. And that's exactly what I wanted. Let him wonder. Let him stew. Let him realize, slowly and painfully, that maybe the woman he thought was simple had a few clever tricks up her sleeve. He couldn't stand not knowing, and that curiosity would drive him straight into my trap. A week later, I caught Aaron doing something that made my blood boil. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those calm days where everything feels right. The garden was in bloom, the air smelled of lilacs, and the sky was an unbroken blue. Melissa and Aaron had come over for lunch again, pretending everything was normal after the barbecue. But I could tell Aaron hadn't let go of what I said that day. His curiosity was no longer playful, it had turned into something obsessive. I noticed it first when we were all sitting on the patio after lunch. Melissa was helping me clear the plates while Aaron pretended to check his phone. I caught him glancing at the shed several times. His gaze lingered just a bit too long each time, like he was trying to see through the walls. When Melissa went inside to get dessert, I saw Aaron slowly stand up, pretending to stretch. I'm just gonna make a quick call, he said, already walking toward the yard. I didn't say a word. I just watched from the kitchen window as he paced near the shed, pretending to be on the phone. His so-called call didn't last long. The moment he thought no one was watching, he walked right up to the shed door and tried the handle. He was lucky or unlucky, depending on how you see it, that I always kept it locked. When the handle didn't budge, he glanced over his shoulder, scanned the yard, and bent slightly, peering through the small side window. That was the moment my patience snapped. I stepped outside, my voice steady but firm. Lose something, Aaron? He straightened so fast you'd think he'd been caught committing a crime. Oh, Diana. I was just, admiring craftsmanship. Charles did a great job on this thing, didn't he? Admiring the lock, too? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled awkwardly. No, of course not. I was just curious. You mentioned it pays for itself, and, well, that got me thinking maybe I could build something similar at our place. Good idea, I said evenly, crossing my arms. Though I doubt you'll need my shed for inspiration. He mumbled something and quickly walked back toward the patio, his face red. I didn't press the issue, but the seed of mistrust had already planted itself firmly in my mind. For the rest of the afternoon, I acted as though nothing had happened, but inside I was furious. My shed was private not just because it held other people's belongings, but because it represented everything I'd built for myself. Aaron snooping around, it felt like an invasion, not just of space, but of dignity. Later that evening, after they'd gone home, I walked out to the shed to check if everything was still in place. The lock was fine, the boxes untouched. Still, I decided to move a few items around and double-check the inventory. Everything was accounted for, but I couldn't shake off the unease. That night, I sat in bed thinking about Aaron's behavior. He was nosy, sure, but this was different. This was deliberate. The way he'd pretended to be casual, it was too rehearsed. He wasn't just curious anymore. He was determined to find out what I was doing. Over the next few visits, I noticed more of the same. He'd find reasons to linger near the backyard, offering to check the fence or get the kids' ball when it conveniently rolled near the shed. Once, I saw him trying to peek through the small gap in the curtains I'd hung inside the window. I never said anything. Not yet. Sometimes silence speaks louder than confrontation. Let him think I was unaware. Let him dig his own hole deeper. The funny thing was, the more he tried to snoop, the more careful I became. I added another lock, one of those keypad ones that required a code. I even replaced the small curtain with a thicker one so no one could see inside. Melissa noticed me making these changes one afternoon. "Mom, why are you suddenly upgrading the shed security? You hiding treasure in there?" she teased. "Something like that," I replied with a smile. If only she knew. One Saturday, they came over again. This time, I decided to test Aaron's nerves a little. While we were all sitting outside, I casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, I've been getting more business inquiries lately. Might have to expand the space soon." He froze, mid-sip of his drink. "Business?" he asked too quickly. "Yes," I said, feigning innocence. "You know, just a small side project, nothing major." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That so? What kind of business are we talking about?" I tilted my head and smiled. "A private one." He laughed, but I could tell it wasn't genuine. His curiosity had officially turned into suspicion. That evening, after they left, I walked out to my shed again. The night air was cool, the sky full of stars. I ran my hand along the door and smiled to myself. Aaron thought he was clever, snooping around trying to uncover my secret. But what he didn't realize was that every move he made only made me stronger, more careful, more confident. I'd learned a long time ago that people like him, people who thrive on superiority, can't stand not being in control. And sooner or later, that weakness would expose them. So I decided to let him keep wondering. Let him spiral. Let him lose sleep over what I might be hiding. Because every moment he spent obsessed with my shed was another moment I was quietly building my independence and my victory. He wouldn't stop until he found out what I was hiding, and I was counting on that. It happened sooner than I expected. Aaron finally found out what was inside. It was a cool autumn afternoon, one of those calm, peaceful days when the golden leaves drift lazily across the yard. Melissa had stopped by to help me bring in groceries, and Aaron had tagged along, though he seemed distracted the entire time. I didn't think much of it until later. I'd left my spare keys on the porch table while unloading the car. It wasn't something I normally did. I was usually meticulous about keeping the shed key hidden away. But that day, in the rush of carrying bags and chatting with Melissa, I wasn't as careful as usual. While Melissa and I were inside putting things away, Aaron excused himself to take a call. I barely noticed him stepping out. 10 minutes later, when I came out to grab a few more bags from the car, the yard was quiet but the shed door was slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat. I knew instantly what had happened. I walked toward it slowly, each step heavier than the last. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open, and there it was. The lock hung loosely, the key still in the latch. Inside, the light was on, and a faint smell of cardboard and lavender filled the air. Aaron stood frozen in the middle of the shed, surrounded by shelves lined neatly with labeled boxes. His phone was in his hand, camera open, as if he'd been taking pictures. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I asked. My voice calm but firm. He jumped, like a child caught stealing cookies. "Diana, I was just curious. I didn't mean any harm." I crossed my arms. "Curious enough to break into my shed?" He laughed nervously, gesturing toward the shelves. "What is all this? You're renting it out? Are these other people's things?" "Yes," I said evenly. "They're clients. I run a small storage rental business. Everything's legal, everything's documented. Is that a problem?" He blinked, confused. "Wait, you're serious? You're actually charging people to store their junk in here?" "Not junk," I corrected. "Merchandise, equipment, supplies, and yes, I charge for it. Quite successfully, in fact." He scoffed, half in disbelief and half in embarrassment. "You can't be serious. You running a business out of your backyard? That's ridiculous." "Ridiculous or not, it pays my bills," I replied. "And it's perfectly legitimate. I file the income, I pay taxes, I even have contracts. There's nothing shady about it." For a moment, he just stood there, his mouth slightly open, clearly trying to process what he was hearing. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head, the same man who loved to belittle my choices now realizing I was quietly outsmarting him all along. He laughed again. But it came out forced. So that's what all the secrecy was about? You've been renting this out? I thought, well, honestly, I don't know what I thought. I'm sure you didn't, I said coolly. Because you assumed I wasn't capable of anything meaningful. Aaron frowned, defensive now. Hey, don't twist this around. You can't just run a business like this without proper zoning or permits. What if the city finds out? You could get fined. I smiled faintly. Already checked. It's classified as private property use, and since it's not commercial foot traffic, I'm within my rights. I even cleared it with the homeowners association. That shut him up. He lowered his phone slowly, realizing there was nothing illegal or scandalous about what I was doing, just something he'd never expected from me. I took a small step closer. You know, Aaron, I never understood why my independence bothered you so much. Maybe you should ask yourself why someone else's success makes you so defensive. He didn't answer. He just stared at the boxes, at the neat rows of organized shelves that represented something he couldn't control or belittle. Finally, he muttered, I just think it's strange that you didn't tell anyone, especially Melissa. I didn't need to, I said simply. This is my home, my business, my life. I don't owe you explanations. The tension in the air was thick. Aaron looked like he wanted to argue, but the logic was undeniable. I walked past him, took the key out of the door, and locked it again. I'd appreciate it if you didn't go through my things without asking, I said. He stuffed his hands into his pockets and mumbled something under his breath before walking away toward the house. When I came back inside, Melissa and the kids were in the living room watching a movie, oblivious to what had just happened. Aaron sat silently, his face red, avoiding my eyes. I didn't say a word either. I didn't need to. That night, after they left, I stood by the window, watching the soft glow of the shed light. The whole scene replayed in my head, his arrogance melting into shock, his smirk vanishing the moment he realized I wasn't a fool. It was a small victory, but an immensely satisfying one. For years, I'd listened to him talk about investments, real estate, and smart money decisions, all while making me feel like I had nothing to offer. And yet, here I was, turning a simple backyard structure into something productive. I could almost hear Charles's voice in my head, laughing softly. Told you, Di, you've always been cleverer than you think. That night, I went to bed with a quiet smile. Let Aaron stew in his confusion. He'd wanted to see what was inside the shed so badly, well, now he had. And the truth had humiliated him more than anything I could have said. The look on his face when he realized I'd done everything above board was priceless. Aaron couldn't handle the idea that I was more financially clever than he was. The day after he'd snooped in my shed, I could sense his discomfort like a storm brewing in silence. He didn't say much when we all sat down for breakfast that morning, but his quiet wasn't peaceful, it was simmering. I'd seen that look before on his face, the kind that meant he felt challenged, maybe even humiliated. And Aaron was the kind of man who didn't take humiliation well. A few days later, Melissa called. Mom, what exactly happened between you and Aaron yesterday? He's been acting weird ever since. I smiled faintly. Ask your husband, I said softly. I'm sure he'll have a version of events. There was a pause. Mom, she said carefully, just tell me. He said he walked into your shed by accident, and you got angry. By accident? I let out a short laugh. Melissa, he used my key. That wasn't an accident, she sighed. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know. I'll talk to him. Don't worry, I said. I already did. But the truth was, our talk wasn't over. That weekend, they came over again for dinner. I could feel the tension before they even arrived. Aaron walked in with that fake grin of his and greeted me like nothing had happened. I played along, setting the table and pretending everything was fine. But it didn't take long for his pride to resurface. Halfway through dinner, he couldn't resist. So, Diana, he began, his tone light but cutting. Have you told Melissa yet about your little enterprise in the shed? Melissa looked up from her plate, startled. Enterprise? I put down my fork and looked at him calmly. I was waiting for the right time. Aaron leaned back in his chair, smirking. She's renting out the shed, he said. Apparently she's running a whole business out of it. Melissa's eyes widened. Mom, is that true? Yes, I said, nodding. I rent it out as storage space for a few local business owners. It's completely legal. I've even declared it for taxes. Melissa blinked, then smiled a little. That's actually brilliant. Aaron's smirk faltered. Brilliant? Come on. Melissa. It's a shed in the backyard. She's not exactly running a company here. Maybe not, she said. But she's making extra income. That's pretty smart if you ask me. His jaw tightened. It's risky, he said quickly. She could get into trouble. She's not following zoning rules or safety codes. I've already looked into that, I said, keeping my voice steady. I made sure everything was compliant. I even talked to the local association before starting. He blinked, clearly thrown off. Oh, well, that's surprising. What's really surprising, I said, leaning forward slightly, is how interested you seem to be in something that doesn't concern you. Melissa glanced between us, sensing the edge in my voice. Aaron, she said quietly, why did you go into the shed without permission? He rolled his eyes. I was curious. That's all. I thought she was hiding something weird. How was I supposed to know she was? Running a rental business? I smiled thinly. By asking, perhaps? He ignored me. Look, I just think it's odd she didn't tell anyone. It feels sneaky. I folded my hands together. Sneaky? Or independent? There's a difference. Aaron's face reddened. You don't have to get defensive. I was just looking out for the family. The family? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You were looking out for your ego. That shut him up, but not for long. He slammed his fork down lightly and said, You're twisting things, Diana. I've been trying to help you since Charles passed. Remember who fixed your fence? Who set up your internet when you couldn't figure it out? Melissa sighed. Aaron. But I interrupted softly. Yes, I remember, and I appreciated it. But helping someone doesn't give you the right to look down on them. He opened his mouth to argue, but Melissa finally spoke up. Aaron, that's enough. You were wrong to go through her shed. Just admit it. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Fine, whatever. I was just trying to understand what was going on. I didn't mean any harm. His tone was dismissive, but his eyes were sharp. He wasn't done, not by a long shot. After dinner, Melissa helped me clean up while Aaron went to sit outside. Mom, she whispered. I'm really proud of you. I had no idea you were doing all this on your own. It's kind of amazing. I smiled softly. Thank you, sweetheart. I didn't tell you because I wanted to make sure it worked first. And it did. She hugged me. Aaron just doesn't like being out of the loop. He'll get over it. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. Men like Aaron didn't get over being embarrassed, especially by someone they'd underestimated. He'd been shown up, and his pride wouldn't let it go quietly. When they left that night, he barely said goodbye. I watched him from the window as they got into the car. He was talking fast, his hands moving in sharp gestures. Melissa looked exhausted. I knew what that meant. He wasn't angry because of the shed. He was angry because he'd lost control of the narrative, of the superiority he loved to flaunt. And men like that? They always find a way to get even. But while she admired me, Aaron was secretly plotting to get back at me. Not long after, I noticed something suspicious near the shed. It started small, so small in fact, that I brushed it off at first. One morning, as I walked out to water the garden, I noticed the padlock on my shed hanging slightly loose. It wasn't broken, just turned halfway, as if someone had fiddled with it. I assumed maybe one of my renters hadn't locked it properly after dropping something off, but then it happened again a few days later. This time, the lock wasn't just loose, it was scratched. Deep grooves lined the metal, the kind that come from someone trying to force it open. My stomach sank. None of my tenants would do that. They respected my space and always texted me before coming by. There was only one person I could imagine snooping around again. Aaron. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I told myself maybe it was kids from the neighborhood or just bad luck. But the pattern continued. Boxes were shifted slightly. Things that were neatly stacked suddenly appeared, moved an inch or two to the side. It was subtle, but I knew my organization by heart. Someone had been inside, or at least trying to be. I decided to be smart about it. Instead of confronting him right away, I quietly went online and ordered a small, discreet motion-activated camera. It was about the size of a matchbox and could attach under the shed's eaves, almost invisible. If someone came poking around again, I'd have proof. The day it arrived, I installed it myself. I made sure it was angled perfectly toward the door and blended with the trim of the shed. No one would notice it unless they were looking for it. For several nights, nothing happened. The footage showed only raccoons, the occasional cat, and the gentle sway of tree branches in the breeze. But then, one evening around 11:30 p.m., I saw something that made my blood run cold. There he was, Aaron. On the camera footage, he crept through the side gate, flashlight in hand. He was wearing a hoodie, probably to avoid being recognized, though that was useless. I'd recognize his arrogant posture anywhere. He went straight for the shed door, tried the lock, and even bent down to inspect the hinges. When he realized it wouldn't budge, he stepped back, muttered something to himself, and left. I sat there in my living room, staring at the footage over and over again, my heart pounding. It wasn't just disrespect anymore, it was obsession. He wasn't just curious. He was determined to prove I was doing something wrong. The next morning, I transferred the video to my phone and saved a backup on my computer. I didn't plan to show it immediately. No, I wanted the timing to be perfect. People like Aaron needed to be exposed publicly, where their pride couldn't protect them. Over the next few days, he acted normal, smiling, chatting, pretending nothing was wrong. That told me everything I needed to know. He didn't realize I knew. Melissa called midweek, asking if I could host her upcoming birthday dinner at my place. She said she wanted something homey and relaxing. I hesitated for a second, then smiled to myself. Maybe fate was handing me the perfect opportunity. Of course, sweetheart, I said. I'd love to. In the meantime, I kept up appearances. Every time Aaron made one of his snide comments about my secret little business, I just smiled politely and said, "You'll find out one day." It drove him crazy. The night before Melissa's birthday, I double-checked the camera footage again, just to be sure there was no mistake. The image was clear as day, his face illuminated by his own flashlight, staring straight at the shed door. There was no way he could talk his way out of it. When the day of the dinner arrived, everything was perfect. I made Melissa's favorite roast chicken with herbs and honey-glazed carrots. The table was set beautifully, candles flickering softly, laughter filling the house. Aaron played his usual role of the charming husband, laughing a little too loudly at his own jokes, pretending to be the ideal family man. But I noticed how he avoided looking at the shed. He couldn't even glance in its direction without his jaw tightening. He knew he'd crossed a line, even if he didn't think I knew it yet. After dinner, while everyone was enjoying dessert, I sat quietly, sipping my tea, waiting for the right moment. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I felt calm, eerily calm, because I knew what was coming, and I knew exactly how much it would shake him. Melissa leaned back in her chair, smiling. "Mom, this was wonderful. I think this is the best birthday dinner I've ever had." I smiled warmly. "I'm glad you think so, sweetheart. I wanted tonight to be memorable." Aaron, sitting across the table, chuckled. "Oh, it's memorable, all right. I'm surprised you didn't host it inside the shed." Melissa rolled her eyes. "Aaron, enough with the jokes." "Oh, it's fine," I said gently, setting down my cup. "Actually, speaking of the shed," his smirk faltered just a little. I leaned back and folded my hands. "I've been meaning to show you something interesting I found recently." He laughed nervously. "What's that?" "Oh, just a little video," I said. "From the new security camera I installed outside." The color drained from his face. He froze mid-breath. That moment came sooner than expected. During Melissa's birthday dinner, as everyone gathered for Melissa's birthday, tension simmered beneath the smiles. I could feel it before anyone else did. Aaron laughed a little too loudly, filled everyone's glasses a little too quickly, and talked about everything except what he really wanted to avoid: the shed. He thought I didn't know. He thought his late-night visit was a secret buried in the dark. But tonight, the truth was going to shine right in his face. The evening had gone beautifully until that point. The food was perfect, the kids were playing happily, and Melissa looked genuinely joyful for the first time in weeks. I almost felt bad about what I was about to do, almost. After dessert, we all moved to the living room for coffee and cake. Aaron leaned back in his chair, pretending to be relaxed, but every time someone mentioned the backyard, his body tensed. I decided it was time. I stood up, smiling pleasantly. "You know, Melissa," I began, "I wanted to give you something special this year. Something you'll remember." She smiled. "Mom, you've already done enough. Dinner was perfect." "Oh no," I said softly. This is something different. I picked up the remote and turned on the TV. The screen lit up, and I selected the video file I'd queued earlier. Aaron's laughter died instantly. The first few seconds were black and silent. Then, the footage appeared grainy but clear enough to see the figure moving across my backyard at night. The flashlight beam cut through the dark, and the shape of a man became unmistakable. Melissa frowned. "Mom, what is this?" "Just some security footage," I said lightly. Then came the moment where the man turned toward the camera. The flashlight caught his face, clear as day. Aaron. His eyes wide, his mouth tight with concentration. The room went silent. Melissa's jaw dropped. "Aaron, is that you?" He blinked, his color fading fast. "That's not..." He stopped himself mid-sentence, realizing how hopeless that lie would sound. "Okay, yes, that's me. But it's not what it looks like." I tilted my head. "Really? Because it looks exactly like you sneaking into my yard at night and trying to break into my shed." "I wasn't breaking in," he snapped. "I was checking something. I thought I heard noises like maybe someone was trespassing." Melissa turned on him, her eyes flashing. "At midnight? With a flashlight? You thought my mom was hiding burglars in her shed?" He stammered. "I know, I just wanted to make sure everything was safe. For the kids. You know, since we come here often," I cut in, my voice calm and measured. "Aaron, you've mocked my shed for months. Then you snooped around it, went inside without permission, and when that wasn't enough, you came back in the middle of the night. Don't pretend you were worried about safety. You were looking for something to use against me." He clenched his jaw. "That's ridiculous." Melissa crossed her arms. "No, it's not. It's exactly what you do when you feel threatened by someone else's success." The guests sitting nearby, Aaron's friends and coworkers, shifted awkwardly. No one said a word. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the wall clock. Aaron looked around desperately, trying to find an ally, but none of his friends met his eyes. I walked closer, my voice steady. "You've spent months belittling me. You laughed at me, mocked my work, and tried to make me feel small. But when you realized I was doing something you couldn't control, you tried to sabotage it. You broke my trust, my privacy, and for what? To prove I wasn't capable?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "You're twisting this into something it's not." "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Then tell me, what exactly is it?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence that followed was more damning than anything I could have said. Melissa stood abruptly, her voice trembling with anger. "I can't believe you did this, Aaron. To my mother, of all people. You've been treating her like a joke. And now this? Sneaking into her property?" Aaron finally snapped, his temper boiling over. "Oh, don't act like she's some innocent victim. She's been hiding things, being secretive. What kind of person runs a business behind their family's back?" Melissa shot back. "An independent one. Someone who doesn't need your approval for every decision she makes." That stung him. I saw it in his eyes, the bruised pride, the exposed insecurity. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting his own silence condemn him. Then I said softly, "I think you owe me an apology." He looked away. "You're not getting one." "Fine," I said calmly. "Then you're getting something else." I picked up my phone and played another short clip, the one of him actually touching the shed's lock, muttering under his breath. The evidence was undeniable. Melissa gasped. "Aaron, you lied to me," he groaned, rubbing his temples. "You're all overreacting. It's just a shed." "No," Melissa said coldly. "It's not just a shed. It's my mother's hard work. Something she built on her own while you were too busy looking down on her." He glared at me then, his face red. "You're trying to turn her against me." I shook my head. "No, Aaron. You did that all by yourself." The silence that followed was heavy, final. Melissa excused herself and went upstairs, clearly fighting back tears. The guests quietly began leaving one by one, murmuring awkward goodbyes. Aaron sat on the couch, staring at the floor, humiliated and defeated. I didn't say another word to him. I didn't need to. The footage had spoken for me. That night, after everyone was gone, I stepped outside and looked toward the shed. It stood there peacefully. A quiet reminder that strength doesn't need to be loud or flashy. It just needs to stand its ground. Aaron's flashlight beam had once tried to expose me, but in the end, it only exposed him. But instead of apologizing, he decided to turn everyone against me. The following weeks were painfully tense. After the birthday dinner confrontation, everything in our family dynamic shifted. What had once been warm, if occasionally awkward, now felt like walking through a minefield. Melissa stopped calling as often, torn between anger at Aaron and guilt over what had happened. Aaron, on the other hand, was on a quiet mission to make me look like the villain. He started small. Whispered comments to family members, twisted versions of the story. Little things said, in concern. I heard from my sister, Julia, a week later. Diana, she said over the phone, Aaron mentioned you've been running some kind of illegal storage business. Are you sure you're allowed to do that? I sighed, trying not to let my frustration seep into my voice. It's perfectly legal, Julia. I've got the paperwork to prove it. Well, she hesitated. You know how people talk. Maybe you should have just told everyone from the start. I didn't need approval, I replied firmly. It's my property, my business. She fell silent after that, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. And that was exactly what Aaron wanted to make people question me, to erode my credibility quietly. Meanwhile, Melissa and I kept our conversations short. I knew she was struggling. I could hear it in her voice, the way it trembled between loyalty to me and fear of confrontation with her husband. She loved him, but the cracks in their marriage were starting to show. As for me, I poured my energy into the one thing that still gave me peace. My shed. Business was still steady, even growing. Word of mouth continued to spread. And soon, a local antique dealer reached out, asking if I had more space for his overflow inventory. I didn't have any more room in the shed, but that got me thinking. My garage was half empty, and with a little rearranging, I could turn that into another rental unit. So that's exactly what I did. I cleaned it out, installed a new lock, added shelves, and listed it on the same storage platform. Within 2 weeks, I had 2 new renters. Between the shed and the garage, I was earning close to $1,000 a month steady, honest income that made me prouder than any fancy job title ever could. But Aaron couldn't stand it. I could tell from the few times we spoke. Every word out of his mouth carried bitterness. One Sunday, Melissa brought the kids over without him. She seemed quiet, almost hollow. When I asked how things were going, she sighed. He's just angry all the time lately. He says I embarrassed him by taking your side. I placed a hand on hers. Sweetheart, you didn't embarrass him. He embarrassed himself. She gave a sad smile. You know him. He doesn't see it that way. I nodded. Then maybe it's time he does. Over the next few weeks, Aaron stopped coming by entirely. At first, I enjoyed the peace, but soon enough, his absence became its own statement. Family dinners were now awkwardly divided affairs. Melissa and the kids would visit me separately, while Aaron stayed home. But that didn't mean he'd let go. Oh no. He was still stirring trouble this time with relatives, mutual friends, even neighbors. One afternoon, my neighbor Carol stopped me while I was collecting mail. Diana, she said hesitantly, I heard from someone that your shed might not be up to code. You know how the HOA can be. I smiled calmly. If anyone has concerns, they can speak to me directly. Everything's been cleared with the association. She nodded, embarrassed. Of course, I didn't believe it for a second. You've always been so organized. But I could tell she had believed it at least a little. That's what Aaron was good at, planting seeds of doubt. I decided then that I wouldn't waste my time defending myself to gossip. I had proof of everything, and I didn't need anyone's validation. Instead, I focused on maintaining my professionalism. I kept my records spotless, my communication with clients clear, and my paperwork neatly filed. Still, I couldn't deny it hurt. Not because of his lies, but because he was dragging Melissa into the middle of it. I knew she was exhausted, trying to keep the peace between us. But I also knew something inside her was changing. The last time we spoke about it, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. Mom, I can't keep pretending this is normal. He's not the man I thought he was. I pulled her into a hug. It's okay, sweetheart. Sometimes it takes a long time to see people for who they really are. She nodded into my shoulder. I think I'm finally starting to. That was when I realized something. Aaron's plan to ruin my reputation was starting to backfire. The more he tried to turn people against me, the more his bitterness showed. It wasn't me who looked bad, it was him. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't gloat, didn't retaliate. I just kept working, earning, and living peacefully. The truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, and I knew his pride would eventually push him into making a bigger mistake. I just didn't know how far he'd go. Because one morning, a white envelope appeared in my mailbox, no return address, no name. Inside was a printed notice from the city, stamped and official-looking. Notice of investigation regarding unpermitted business activity. For a few seconds, I just stared at it, my hands trembling. Then I smiled. Of course. There was only one person petty enough and desperate enough to try something like this. But Aaron wasn't done yet. He had one last cruel trick up his sleeve. One morning, I received an unexpected visit from a city inspector. It was a crisp Tuesday, the kind of morning where the air smells like cut grass and coffee. I was in the middle of repotting some orchids when I heard the knock. At first, I thought it was a delivery, but when I opened the door, a man stood there holding a clipboard and an official-looking badge. "Good morning, ma'am. My name's Rick Turner. I'm with the City Zoning and Compliance Department," he said politely. "We received a report about possible unpermitted business activity on your property. Would you mind if I took a look around?" My stomach dropped, but my face didn't show it. I'd expected something like this, just not so soon. "Of course," I said calmly. "Come on in, I'll show you everything." He nodded, clearly not expecting cooperation. "Thank you, ma'am. It won't take long." As he followed me to the backyard, I could almost feel my pulse sinking with each step. But beneath the nervousness, I felt something else: anger. Not fear, not shame, but a deep, quiet fury. I knew exactly who was behind this. When we reached the shed, Rick examined the exterior carefully, jotting down notes. "How long have you been using this structure for business purposes?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "About 9 months. I rent it as private storage for local small business owners. It's supplemental income. Everything's documented, and I pay taxes on it," he nodded. "Do you have any of that documentation available?" "Of course." I opened the shed, letting him inspect the inside. It was clean, organized, and well-maintained. The tenants' items were neatly labeled, nothing hazardous or inappropriate. I even showed him the motion light and security system, explaining how I keep the area safe for renters. Afterward, I invited him inside to see my paperwork, contracts, receipts, even the portion of my tax form that listed supplemental property rental income. I could tell by the look on his face that he wasn't expecting such thoroughness. "Well," he said finally, flipping through the last few pages, "I have to say, Mrs. Collins, this is one of the most organized setups I've ever seen. Whoever reported you made it sound like a full-blown illegal operation." I smiled. "Let me guess, they didn't leave their name?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Anonymous complaint." Of course it was. He gave me a sympathetic smile. "Don't worry, you're in the clear. Everything you've shown me checks out. I'll close this report today." "Thank you," I said, shaking his hand. "And thank you for being thorough. It's important to do things right." After he left, I stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the shed in silence. The relief washed over me slowly, but it was laced with something sharper. Aaron had crossed the final line. Later that evening, as I was making dinner, Melissa arrived unexpectedly. She didn't knock, just walked in, her face pale and tense. "Mom," she said breathlessly, "did someone from the city come by?" "Yes," I replied calmly, stirring the pot on the stove. "They did. Everything's fine. Why do you ask?" She clenched her fists. "Because Aaron admitted it." I froze. "He told me," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "He filed the report. He said he was protecting us, that if you got caught doing something illegal, it could reflect on the family. Can you believe that?" I set the spoon down and turned to her. "And what did you say?" "I told him he's disgusting," she snapped. "That he had no right to interfere in your life. He tried to spin it like he was doing you a favor, Mom." "A favor? After everything you've done for us?" I exhaled slowly. I'd expected as much, but hearing it confirmed still stung. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "I can't do this anymore. He's not the man I married. He's jealous, vindictive, and cruel. He's been trying to tear you down because your success makes him feel small." I reached for her hand. "Sweetheart, I never wanted to come between you two." "You didn't," she said firmly. "He did that all on his own." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The room was quiet except for the faint simmering of the pot on the stove. Then she said softly, "I told him I'm leaving. My heart clenched. Melissa. She shook her head, her expression resolute. No, Mom, I've made up my mind. I packed a bag. The kids are at my sister's tonight. I'll come stay here for a while if that's okay. I hugged her tightly, tears stinging my own eyes. Of course it's okay. You and the kids will always have a home here. That night, as she unpacked in the guest room, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, staring at the shed once again. The air was cool, and the faint hum of crickets filled the silence. I thought about Aaron's smug grin, his constant need to assert dominance, his inability to handle being wrong. And now, he had nothing left. His false report had not only failed, it had destroyed his own marriage. A small part of me pitied him, but most of me felt something else entirely: freedom. He'd tried to take away my peace, my dignity, my independence. Instead, he'd given me proof that standing tall, even quietly, always wins in the end. When Melissa came outside to join me, she handed me a blanket and said softly, "He's moving out tomorrow." He admitted everything. His job found out too, apparently. Word spread after your dinner video incident. His coworkers saw him differently after that. He's been on thin ice ever since. I sipped my tea, feeling the warmth spread through me. I didn't need to ruin him, I said quietly. He did that all by himself. Melissa leaned her head on my shoulder. You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, Mom. I smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I just learned that sometimes the best revenge is letting people see who they really are. As the night deepened, I felt an unfamiliar calm settle over me. No anger, no bitterness, just peace. That was the day Aaron's arrogance finally cost him everything. With Aaron out of the picture, peace slowly returned to my life. The air in my home felt lighter, the silence no longer uncomfortable but serene. For the first time in years, I could wake up without bracing myself for tension-filled phone calls or backhanded comments. Melissa and the kids had moved in temporarily, and although the circumstances weren't ideal, our house felt alive again, filled with laughter, warmth, and the sound of little feet racing through the halls. The first week after Aaron left, Melissa was quiet. She moved like a woman caught between relief and grief, relieved to be free from his manipulation but grieving the life she'd tried so hard to hold together. I didn't push her to talk. I just made her tea every evening, sat with her in silence, and let her find her strength again. Meanwhile, business at my little dollhouse shed continued to thrive. My renters were happy, payments came on time, and the antique dealer who'd reached out earlier officially signed a year-long lease for my newly organized garage space. That meant another $400 a month in income. It still amazed me sometimes how something as humble as a garden shed had transformed into my source of financial freedom. One morning, I was outside rearranging boxes when my florist tenant, Carla, stopped by. She smiled when she saw Melissa helping me sweep the walkway. "You two make quite the team," she said. "You know, Diana, I've been telling everyone about you. You're like the neighborhood legend now, the woman who turned her backyard into a business." I laughed softly. "Legend might be a stretch, but thank you," Carla grinned. "Don't be modest. You've inspired half the small business owners around here. You should think about offering workshops or something. People could learn a lot from you." The idea stayed with me long after she left. A workshop? Me? I'd never thought of myself as a teacher. But maybe there was something there, a chance to help others, especially women my age, who felt stuck or underestimated. That evening, I brought it up to Melissa. "What do you think about starting something small? Maybe online classes, or a community group for people who want to rent out extra space like I did?" Her eyes lit up. "Mom, that's brilliant. You could call it something catchy like Backyard Beginnings. You'd be perfect for it." I chuckled. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But she was right. There was potential. I realized that for years, I'd limited myself because people like Aaron made me believe my ideas didn't matter. Now, I was done shrinking myself to fit anyone's comfort. As days passed, Melissa grew stronger too. I could see her confidence returning. She started working remotely again, laughing more often, and spending real, present time with her kids. One afternoon, as we sat in the garden watching them play, she turned to me and said, "Mom, thank you. If it weren't for you, I don't think I'd have had the courage to leave." I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. The courage was always there. You just needed to see it." She smiled, eyes glassy with emotion. "I wish Aaron could have seen what he had before he lost it." I sighed. Some people don't realize what they have until it's gone, and by then, it's too late. Weeks turned into months, and our lives settled into a new rhythm. I expanded my rental listings, bought a small security system for the garage, and even put up a cheerful little sign outside the shed that read, Collins Storage Solutions. Secure, simple, smart. It made me proud every time I looked at it. Then something unexpected happened. The local paper reached out after hearing about my success from Carla. A journalist wanted to feature me in a small business spotlight article. When the piece ran, the response was overwhelming. I received dozens of inquiries from people wanting advice on how to start their own backyard storage rentals. Melissa helped me set up a small website to handle the influx. It was simple but professional photos of the shed, testimonials from my renters, and a short story about how it all began. I didn't include any drama, of course. Just the message I wanted to share, that independence has no expiration date. Life was finally calm, fulfilling, and secure. But as I was soon reminded, life has a way of circling back with unfinished business. It was a Saturday morning when I saw a familiar car pull up outside my house. A silver sedan, slightly dented near the bumper. My heart skipped. I hadn't seen it in months, but I knew that car. Aaron stepped out slowly, his shoulders slumped, looking nothing like the man who once strutted across my yard with smug confidence. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes sunken, and the arrogant spark that used to define him was gone. Melissa was out running errands, so it was just me. I could have ignored the knock at the door, but instead, I opened it. He looked at me, guilt written all over his face. "Diana," he said softly, "can we talk?" For a brief moment, I saw not the arrogant man who'd tried to tear me down, but a broken one trying to piece himself back together. But one day, a surprise visit reminded me that karma never forgets. Aaron showed up at my door one Saturday morning, looking completely defeated. Gone was the neatly dressed, self-assured man who used to strut into my home with that smug grin. The person standing in front of me looked smaller somehow, his posture slouched, his eyes tired and red-rimmed, his confidence completely stripped away. "Diana," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but please, can I come in for a minute?" I hesitated, not out of fear, but reflection. Months ago, I might have slammed the door in his face, or at least told him to take his arrogance elsewhere. But something in his tone, something truly broken, made me nod. "All right," I said softly. "Just for a few minutes." He stepped inside slowly, like someone entering sacred ground. I offered him a seat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd once argued, mocked, and belittled me. This time, though, he didn't carry that air of superiority. He sat down quietly, eyes fixed on his hands. For a while, neither of us spoke. The ticking clock on the wall filled the silence. Finally, he said, "I wanted to say I'm sorry." I folded my arms. "Sorry for what exactly, Aaron?" He swallowed hard. "For everything. For how I treated you. For what I said, what I did. For filing that stupid report." I didn't respond right away. I just studied his face, the exhaustion, the guilt. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Why come here after all this time?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because I lost everything. Melissa's gone. The kids barely talk to me. I even lost my job." I wasn't surprised. Melissa had mentioned that his company had caught wind of his behavior, how his reputation had quietly started to crumble after that dinner incident. But hearing it from him still carried a certain weight. He continued, "After you exposed me that night, word spread fast. My coworkers stopped trusting me. My boss said I'd become a liability. And Melissa," his voice cracked slightly, "she packed up and left. She said she couldn't live with someone who didn't respect people. I thought she was bluffing, but she meant it." He let out a bitter laugh. "I guess I deserve it." I stayed quiet, letting his words hang in the air. He wasn't wrong, he did deserve it. But for the first time, I sensed real remorse in him. Not the kind people fake to save face, but the kind that comes when pride finally breaks. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he went on. "I just needed to say it. I was awful to you. I thought I was better because I had a good job, a nice car, a big salary. And then you did something I couldn't even imagine. You built something from nothing. You proved me wrong in every way." He looked up at me, his voice trembling. "I was jealous, Diana. I'll admit it. You made me feel small. And instead of being proud of you, I tore you down because I couldn't handle my own insecurities. For a moment, I saw the young man Melissa must have fallen in love with once, the version of Aaron who still had potential before arrogance and ego consumed him. I took a slow breath. You hurt a lot of people, Aaron. Not just me. You hurt Melissa, your children, yourself. Do you really understand that? He nodded. I do now. I see everything I lost because I couldn't be kind. I looked out the window toward my shed, the morning sunlight bouncing off its fresh coat of paint. It stood there, solid and silent, the symbol of everything I'd rebuilt. Aaron, I said finally, forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from their mistakes. I don't hold anger toward. I've moved on. He blinked, surprised. So, you forgive me? I smiled faintly. I do. But that doesn't mean I forget. You have to live with what you did and learn from it. That's how you make peace with yourself. He nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. Thank you. You didn't have to say that. I didn't, I replied gently. But holding grudges weighs people down. I've carried enough pain in my life. I choose peace. He wiped his eyes, clearly embarrassed, and tried to smile. You're a better person than me, Diana. Truly. I shook my head. No, Aaron. I'm just someone who finally realized my worth, and I hope one day you'll realize yours too without tearing others down to feel it. He stood, his voice soft. I don't know if Melissa will ever forgive me. That's not something you can force, I said. But if you're truly sorry, show it through your actions. Change isn't proven by words, it's proven by who you become. He nodded again, and for the first time since I'd met him, his pride was gone. He extended his hand to me, hesitantly. Thank you for hearing me out. I took it. His grip was weak, almost trembling. Take care of yourself, Aaron, I said. And take care of your heart. It's time you learned to live without resentment. As he turned to leave, he paused by the doorway. You really built something incredible out there, he said softly, glancing toward the shed. I was too blind to see it before. I smiled. It's just a shed, I said. But it taught me everything I needed to know about strength. He nodded and walked away, disappearing down the street with slow, uncertain steps. Melissa came home later that afternoon and noticed my calm demeanor. Mom, what happened? She asked. He came by, I said simply. He apologized. She frowned. And you listened? I did, I replied. Because forgiveness isn't for him, it's for me. She smiled softly, her eyes misty. You're incredible, Mom. I don't think I could have done that. I reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. You would've. Someday, because holding hate only keeps you stuck. Letting go lets you breathe again. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I looked at the shed glowing under the garden lights. It wasn't just wood and paint, it was proof that life can rebuild itself, piece by piece, even after storms. For the first time in years, I felt truly free from resentment. Looking back, I realized that little shed changed my life in ways I never expected. When Charles first built it, it was just a place to store gardening tools and old keepsakes. But after he passed, that small wooden structure became my escape, my peace, and eventually, my rebirth. Every brushstroke, every repair, every moment I spent working on it had unknowingly been preparing me for something greater, the courage to stand on my own. In the months following Aaron's apology, life settled into a gentle rhythm. Melissa finalized her divorce, and though it was painful, she found peace in her decision. She stayed with me for a while longer, helping with the kids and, to my surprise, with the business. What started as me renting out a single shed had now grown into something neither of us could have imagined. With her help, I created a proper name and brand, Collins Storage and Spaces. It sounded professional, something you'd expect from a larger company, yet it was still just us managing our little operations from home. Word of mouth kept spreading, and soon, people weren't just renting space, they were asking me how to start their own versions of it. Melissa set up an online booking system and helped me host a few community workshops at the library. Women from all over the neighborhood came to listen, many of them widowed or retired, all of them curious about how to turn what they already had into something useful. Some had basements, garages, or even spare rooms they weren't using. I taught them everything I'd learned: how to list safely, manage contracts, and stay compliant with local regulations. Seeing those women's eyes light up as they realized they had the power to create their own income that was something special. I wasn't just helping them earn money, I was giving them the same thing I had found: dignity and purpose. Even Carla, my first renter, became a dear friend. She often stopped by with flowers, sometimes just to chat or drop off baked goods. "You're the talk of the town now," she'd laugh. "Everyone's calling you the shed lady with a strategy." I'd chuckle every time, but inside, I felt proud. The same shed that once drew Aaron's laughter now drew admiration and respect. Melissa, too, found her confidence again. She started doing freelance design work from home and spent more time with her children, who adored the garden. Some evenings, we'd sit outside together, me with my tea, her with her laptop, while the boys played near the shed. Watching them run through the grass, laughing freely, I realized that the peace I'd created for myself had spread to the people I loved. Sometimes life's most profound transformations don't come from grand gestures or wealth. They come from the quiet, consistent choices to keep building, even when no one believes in you. Every so often, I'd think back to Aaron. He'd moved out of state for work, trying to rebuild his life. Melissa told me he called occasionally to check on the kids, and that he seemed humbled. I didn't wish him ill. In fact, I hoped he'd truly learned from it all. We were two very different people, but in our own ways, both of us had been forced to start over. One afternoon, as I was planting new tulips along the shed, Melissa joined me. "You know, Mom," she said with a grin, "you could have retired quietly, but instead, you became the neighborhood's entrepreneur." I laughed. "I just didn't like the idea of sitting still. Besides, I think Charles would have wanted me to keep creating." She nodded. "He'd be proud of you. We all are." That touched me deeply. For years, I'd let myself believe my best days were behind me, that my role in life was simply to fade quietly. But now, I knew better. My age didn't define me. My loss didn't define me. My worth wasn't tied to what others thought. Independence had become my greatest achievement, not because it made me money, but because it reminded me that I was capable, adaptable, and strong. Every inch of that shed symbolized my journey. The rough wood from old grief, the smooth paint from healing, the new locks from lessons learned. It wasn't just a structure, it was a story, one built with resilience and quiet determination, and the irony never failed to make me smile. The same place Aaron once mocked had become the foundation of everything he thought I'd never achieve. The shed had seen laughter, tears, betrayal, and triumph, but through it all, it had stood strong. Just like me. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a local women's business event. Standing there, in front of dozens of faces, I told my story not to boast, but to remind others that starting small isn't failure, it's courage. I ended my talk with a simple truth: don't ever let anyone tell you your dreams are too small. Even a shed can change your life if you build it with purpose. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was warm, genuine, the kind that seeps into your soul. I looked out at the audience, feeling Charles's spirit beside me, proud and steady as always. That night, when I got home, the house was quiet. The kids were asleep, and Melissa was reading by the fireplace. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the garden illuminated by soft fairy lights. My shed stood at the far end, glowing faintly under the moonlight. I walked up to it, tracing my fingers along the smooth paint, remembering how it all began with laughter at my expense. Now, that laughter no longer hurt. It was simply part of the story, a reminder that strength often grows best in the soil of doubt. I smiled, whispered a quiet "thank you" to the universe, and turned back toward the house, the lights of my little empire shining behind me. And every time I look at that shed, I smile, knowing that the laughter that once mocked me now echoes as respect.